the fence rests, let's lay it down. Gonna dig deep, wave that verdict round. The defense rests, time to analyze. With the evidence, we'll unveil the crime. Justice served in an honest fight. True crime tales till the verdict's right. Solving more than just trivial quests, where sentences rule at the defense rests.
Good morning, good morning. What a day. Yep. A day indeed. I apologise. I was a bit hyped up last night when I went to bed and obviously couldn't sleep. And Tanya picked me up this morning for my appointment. And when I got home, I flaked it. Good morning. So, yeah, I've been flat out trying to put something together to explain what's going on and what's happening. Mind blown. All right, so, hello, good morning. Where's Miss Anna? Come on in. All right. Now, I don't have to explain to you guys because you were all here last night, but what has transpired since? So, basically, during yesterday's testimony and the day before's, I was questioning the testimony of the second medical examiner and why he changed the manner of death to homicide from I'm so brain dead today, it's not funny. What is it? You know what I mean. Can't even think. So he changed it to homicide anyway. Undetermined, sorry. From undetermined to homicide. And that was done nearly 5 years after Michael's death. So they exhumed him a second time. And so he really had nothing to base that on except for the previous medical records and the last autopsy. And in his infinite wisdom, he has come to the conclusion that the only thing that could have caused Michael's blood sugar to go back down again after it had been treated with IV glucose was that a second or additional insulin had been given to him by somebody else because he was unconscious. And that's wrong. So I'm going to tell you why. So last night's stream, in the middle of it, I was so convinced by what I thought could have been the issue, given the fact that he had been taking steroids, whether it be oral, intramuscularly, subcutaneous, whatever, it doesn't matter, for such a long time. And they said way back, I think, till 2014, it can cause your adrenal gland to either become partially damaged or stop working at all. And I know this because it's happened to me. I got put on prednisolone to treat arthritis back in 2014, funnily enough, and wasn't taken off it. So anything after 3 months can start to damage your adrenal gland. I've been on it now for 11 years, I think. And they only noticed that my adrenal gland wasn't working when they decided to take me off cortisone. And I went into adrenal crisis. So long-term steroid use, your body is always trying to maintain balance. So it's checking constantly the blood levels, your levels in the blood. And if your adrenal gland's detecting that there's cortisol in your blood, which is what it produces, as well as adrenaline, it doesn't manufacture any and put any more in. So if the factory shut down for long enough, it doesn't work. Eventually, it can have, depending on the dosage and the length of time, depends on the damage to the adrenal gland. Mine, nothing. So I have to take penicillin for the rest of my life, or I will end up like Michael, which is why I was concerned when he said that's the only thing that can cause it. Now, that then put everything else into perspective, and it told me that, well, there was no motive. Natalie had insulin around because she's a rep. It was something that he had to get from Mexico when his wife's a pharmacist. I don't know. It doesn't matter if it was anabolic or corticosteroids. It's just the anabolic would be worse. So this is a normal steroid, prednisolone based, which is an anti-inflammatory more than anything. And I put two and two together because I have a friend of mine who had Addison's disease but didn't not. Addison's disease is when you're genetically predisposed to the condition, so it's not something that you've done to create that condition. Secondary Addison's or adrenal insufficiency is generally something that's caused your adrenal gland to stop working, which is like taking long-term steroids. Make sense? So, but either can lead into an adrenal crisis. Now, my friend had, his whole family got diarrhea and gastro, and that dehydrated him and caused him to have, his whole body was what do you call them? Cramping. Every muscle in his body was cramping. He was in that much pain from the cramps that his wife called an ambulance on him. And by the time they got him to the hospital, he was unconscious. Now, his wife and kids couldn't go to the hospital because they all had gastro. So his brother met him there. In the hospital, they constantly kept asking his brother, and I happened to work at this hospital, so I was there. Well, I was up in another ward, but they kept saying to him, is he a diabetic? Is he a diabetic? And his brother's like, no, because it mimics a diabetic coma or ketoacidosis, which would have also thrown off the doctors, because they hear, diabetic educator, insulin, they're not looking outside the box. So, plus, who did he tell that he was taking these steroids long term? I mean, his kids testified that he did it, but they're not there at the time when he's in the hospital. So anyway, my friend, basically, he was very, very lucky. There was one medical doctor that was on who was very, very experienced, and he happened to have been studying this particular disease because it's not very common. And he was called in to see him, and he picked it straight away, and so gave him the treatment for it. And when he came to, the doctor said to him, that's as close to death you'll ever get, because it was that close. So he got diagnosed with Addison's disease, and he's now taking steroids for the rest of his life. So this is what I believe, in my opinion, because everything fits the symptoms, and I'll go through it all with you. The symptoms, the previous hospital visits, everything. He was having mini adrenal crises along the way because either he stopped taking the steroids suddenly, he may have gotten out of stock, who knows. And yeah, this last one, they didn't pick it up, because you have to actually be testing for it to diagnose it. And if you're just checking your blood sugars, it ain't going to do it. And that's why it went down. Right. So I want to go back to All right, sorry, I'll start again. So, during my stream last night, I don't know if I've got it queued up. I didn't have time to really queue it up, but let me see. It's me eating cherries, sorry. Come on, where is it? Oh. Anyway, I stopped the stream, pretty much. Yeah, I've missed it. I can't find it. I can't find it. Anyway, I stopped the stream and I tried to contact the defence attorneys. And I could only find an email address because I'm in Melbourne, they're in West Virginia. I only find one on a search engine type thing. So I sent them an email with my details and then some information on Addison's disease and adrenal crisis. And then I actually contacted Steve from Justice's Process because he lives in West Virginia. Told him the story. You can see it unfold. I was on the phone during the stream talking to him, trying to convince him to contact them for me on my behalf, which he did. And this is where we're at now. He got in contact with them and they thankfully believed him. And subsequently, the 3 expert testimony witnesses that were supposed to be in today, all have scheduling issues. So they're back Monday. There is no court today. So no doubt they will be doing a deep dive into this weekend, and we will see what they present to us on Monday. So we'll go back to the medical examiner and the entire reason why Natalie has been charged with this, based on his opinion, when really he was the only thing he could autopsy was soup and bones. So he was reviewing medical records and the last autopsy, and he's come to this conclusion that there is no other possible explanation than someone giving him insulin shots. All right, so where's my number 1?
Approximately an hour later.
All right, so this is the trial. Let me just move me up here. Oh, no, this one. That'll do. This is a testimony of the medical examiner. I did write his name. No, that's the wrong one. This one. I thought I labelled them. Okay, let's do it.
Buchek's autopsy examination 7 months after Michael's death showed
from the state.
No physical evidence of insulin or insulin injections in Michael's body. Isn't that correct?
Yes, but I don't believe he was looking.
You answered my question. And you conducted an autopsy approximately 4 years after Michael's death with still no objective physical evidence of insulin in Michael's body. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
So the only reasonable conclusion is that you cannot determine the cause and manner of Michael Cochran's death, and as Dr. Kubitschek stated, you cannot determine the cause of death, it's undetermined, and you cannot determine the manner of death, it's undetermined. Isn't that correct?
Cause and manner of death are both opinions. I believe the
Okay.
circumstantial evidence in this case. I already
Circumstantial.
stated my opinion on that.
All right.
And that's where he leaves it. Yeah?
His glucose goes back
Now,
up to
this is-
95.
This is
We don't
same testimony. They're examining Michael's blood sugar levels.
know why. Correct?
Correct.
Then at 10:33 a.m., about 4 hours later, back down to 60. We can't positively say why that happened. Correct?
Correct.
And from the other time marks, from February 7th to February 8th, his blood glucose levels have now gone way up, and by any definition, they would be within normal limits.
They're
Isn't that
above.
correct?
They're above normal limits.
But they're no longer low, and they're no longer indicative of hypoglycemia at that time. Correct?
Correct.
Right. So they treat him with sugar. They put sugar in. His blood sugar comes back up. And then it goes back down again. Now, his explanation for this, someone injected him again. Righto then.
So because of that, because there wasn't any tests or insulin present in Michael's body after death, you cannot say with absolute medical certainty that insulin was involved in Michael Cochran's hypoglycemia or death, can you?
First, I wouldn't use the term absolute.
Yeah.
And there is no other viable explanation for profound hypoglycemia in
One moment. One. Un momento, per favor. Right there.
a non-diabetic, otherwise, relatively healthy male. There are no natural conditions that bring
Natural
someone's blood
conditions.
glucose.
Why limit it to that? Why? He was taking how many tablets? How many supplements? Why would it be natural?
To a lab-confirmed level
All
of
right,
21.
you've made that statement. Let me clarify with some other questions.
You know what? As the universe would have it, the only reason we were able to get in touch with the attorneys is because Mr. Selden was off sick for the day. He wasn't in court. And we just got in there before the experts testified. Like their experts testified.
What if you were told that Michael Cochran injected himself numerous times with insulin prior to his death? Would that change your conclusions? And let me clarify a little more.
It's possible, but why would a non-diabetic person inject themselves with insulin?
Yep, exactly. there is reasons for it, which I will go through, but I don't even know if he was. All right, next one.
Mortem.
Do you have any way of knowing how many doses of insulin Mr. Cochran would have received before his death?
No.
In your opinion, what was the mechanism that ultimately caused Michael Cochran to die?
I believe
Wait
the
for it.
clinical correlation and medical record review demonstrates with the profound hypoglycemia and hypokalemia, which I previously described, that there was an exogenous
Introduction of insulin. So in other words, someone else gave it to him. Yep, that's his only explanation. Someone else must have done it while he's in hospital.
administration of insulin. It does not appear to me to be self-inflicted nor accidental in nature.
So then he changes his he changes the manner of death to homicide, and that, my friends, is the only thing they've got to, like, they had to charge her, because they can't prove anything else. Well, they can't even prove that, but because he changed it to homicide, that's how they were able to lay the charges. Now, I'm going to try and explain. Let me see if I can make myself smaller so you can see what I'm doing. I'm in the way everywhere. Okay. All right. So when you're taking steroids for a long term, you can get heaps and heaps of different issues and side effects, basically. Problems with your vision, round face, hello, they call it a moon face, high blood sugar, increased risk of infections, bone fractures, thinning of your bones, osteoporosis, fatigue, loss of appetite, nausea, muscle weakness, thin skin, bruising, blah, blah. All right, metabolically, it can decrease your glucose tolerance and an increased requirement for insulin. You can have abnormal lipids, which is the liver. So he did have that as part of his medical history. He had his liver enzymes, like his liver function tests came back abnormal. Okay. Hypokalemia, which is low potassium, which he also had. It can also cause, among other things, from a low heart rate, which is bradycardia, heart attacks, irregular heart rhythms, heart enlargement. I seem to recall him having that too. Now, the endocrine system is basically your system that's all your glands, so your pituitary, your thyroid, your adrenal. Now, adrenal insufficiency is when your adrenal gland doesn't work properly, and it causes you to have a buffalo hump, which I have. Menstrual irregularities, well, that wouldn't affect Michael and doesn't affect me because I've had hysterectomy. So it's secondary adrenal and pituitary issues, basically, especially in times of stress. So your adrenal gland, don't forget, produces adrenaline as well. So that fight or flight reflex, you don't get it. I don't get it. So anytime I am unwell or I have surgery or I'm really stressed, that my body basically just slurps every ounce of energy and sugar within my blood cells to counteract that, and then dumps me in a heap at the end. So I'll be in bed a couple of days at least. If I have to have surgery or if I've had gastro or something, I have to titrate my my steroids to compensate for that because I'm not absorbing it. So you have to be really, really careful. And I take magnesium twice a day, like a ton of it, because you can't regulate your body temperature either. So you sweat a lot, and therefore your electrolytes get imbalanced, which is why you cramp up. So you'll see me drinking Gatorade every night on stream because I'm replacing electrolytes just to stop me from cramping, as well as taking magnesium. So anything that stops you from absorbing that can potentially put you into an Addisonian crisis, which is what I believe Michael died from. It also can cause pancreatitis, which your pancreas is responsible for producing your insulin. It suppresses your immune system. So, therefore, you often have an increased, what blood cell count. Do you believe he had that as well? As well as depleting your muscle mass and your bones. So I take vitamin D and all sorts of supplements to help try and counteract that. But if you don't know you've got it, because he wouldn't have known. This happens progressively over a long period of time. So he would not have been aware of what damage he was doing until he stopped taking them suddenly. So it can cause intracranial hypertension. Oh, increased brain swelling. Wow. Did someone say you had that as well? Convulsions. Oh, really? Like epilepsy? Okay. Impaired cognition, tiredness, and weakness. Wow. Okay. Amnesia. You're forgetful. Hello. Irritability and emotional instability, insomnia, memory loss, mood swings. Okay, so there are different types of adrenal insufficiency and they have different causes, as I said. So you've got mainly it's long-term cortisone or corticosteroid use, unless it's genetic, which is Addison's disease. They call it comes under quite a few different names. So you've got secondary Addison's disease, adrenal insufficiency, adrenal fatigue. They're all basically saying that your adrenal gland is fucked. To what extent is just the difference. So, when you suddenly stop taking them after a long time, your adrenal gland doesn't kick back in or doesn't kick back in as best as it should. So you you don't produce any cortisol at all. So you don't have the energy, you don't have the adrenaline, you don't have anything like that. Let me move me back up. I can't see. And once you stop taking them, they may be slow. Your adrenal glands might be slow to start again if they start at all. So to diagnose it, generally it's medical history. They'll ask you whether you're taking any other medications. Well, he was obviously, and when he presented at hospital, he was unconscious. So they wouldn't have been able to ask him. They normally check specifically in your blood tests for your level of cortisol. So if they're not looking for it, they won't find it. And generally it's done in the morning because that's when your cortisol's the lowest. So it's fasting. And cortisol replacement therapy, I have to take a certain level, like your body produces generally about 7 milligrams per day of cortisol. And I take 16 milligrams at the moment to control my arthritis. So I take them in 3 different doses over the day. I divide it up so that my cortisol levels try and balance out for the day, and I don't have that, high and low. Because if I took it all in the morning, come 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I'll be in bed. Because you don't produce it. You've got to try and balance it out for the day. They will check for your aldosterone, your glucose, your sodium, potassium. Well, they did check your sodium, potassium, and his glucose. But if they're not looking for the cortisol, they won't find it. Okay. This is annoying me going back up and down and round and about. I didn't even think of that when I prepared the slides. I was too busy typing. So, how do you treat it? IV hydrocortisone. Simple as that. You replace it. They will also probably treat you for whatever caused the crisis, whether it be dehydration, what have you, just to try and get your electrolytes back in balance. But it's basically replacing the cortisone. And it affects almost every organ and tissue in your body. It regulates your body's stress responses, your metabolism, suppressing inflammation, regulating your blood pressure, regulating your blood sugar. Look at that. Your sleep-wake cycle. And can't read the last one. Other names for adrenal crisis include an Addisonian crisis, because it's Addisonian disease. Addison's disease. So, what is it? It's where your adrenal glands don't make enough of the hormone cortisol. It is a life-threatening complication of adrenal insufficiency or Addison's disease. Absolutely life-threatening. Mimics diabetic coma. 100%. What triggers it? If your adrenal gland's damaged, either by surgery or diseases or what have you, but it can be, as I said, caused from long-term cortisone, steroids, dehydration, infection. If you stop taking the medications, the corticosteroids, and times of stress, basically. Now, they're not common. That's why not a lot of people pick them up. All right. So it's 1 in 100,000 people in the US. So it's not one that they're really looking out for. And some studies suggest that up to 25% of people who have an adrenal crisis die from it. It is a medical emergency. It can cause a lack of blood flow and put you into shock, which progresses quickly and will damage your organs. And without treatment, up to 20% of people in shock will die. An adrenal crisis may also cause seizures or a coma. The funny thing is, when Steve got hold of the attorneys, they didn't even know how insulin worked and how it affected the body. You'd think if your client is being charged with insulin poisoning, you would look up, you would try and work out what you're dealing with, maybe. So there's heaps of symptoms: abdominal pain, fatigue, appetite suppressed, lost weakness, diarrhea, confusion. He had all of those. Low blood sugar, fainting, lightheadedness, low blood pressure. So all of those things can be attributed to something else. Like they're not exclusive to themselves, part of the cortisol level, which is what you would need to be testing for. when you're looking for it. And because they were just looking at his sugars and his electrolytes, I didn't pick it up because no one knew. And the fact that my thinking is, you know, the 3 vials that they actually took from the home, there was 2 insulin and 1 supposedly labelled clomiphene. Inside the clomiphene wasn't that drug, it was the steroid. I have a feeling maybe that he was telling Natalie he was taking this clomiphene to treat his libido and sex drive and whatever, but he swapped it out for the steroids. That's just my theory. So once once I finally dosed off last night, I woke up to a notification that Steve had gone live. I'm like, well, it's not time for the day for Steve to go live. What's going on? Uh-huh. Nope. Oh, Lord. I just have to put up with it, don't I? So, this is what I woke up to this morning. The fan and the proverbial shit. So, Steve had actually himself done a deep dive. And his wife is a nurse as well. He had consulted with her my theory, and she 100% went, yes! So, this is what he put up this morning, which is why we don't have court today.
All right, everybody, welcome. So we're doing this live tonight because an interesting theory was brought to my attention by my good friend, the defense rest, Jody Bolt, over there in Australia, and she brought to me a theory that I've been investigating. And I wanted to bring these findings out right away because I think she may have found possibly a very good explanation for what happened to Michael Cochran, and that this could be one of those instances in life where it was just a culmination of bad acts as far as the Ponzi scheme was concerned, intersecting with Michael Cochran's illness brought on by his steroid use, and it all just kind of formulated the perfect storm here that led to her being brought to trial. So we're going to test this out. I have done a investigation into this, looking into the testimony, looking into everything that's been presented so far. We're going to be on a 3-day break from the trial. I'm going to bring that to you here. And in the process, we're going to be kind of reviewing what's happened in the case. So we're not going to be on too long, but I wanted to bring this out so that those of you out there who might have experience in this can weigh in as well. Does this theory solve this case? Could this be the answer that makes sense? Because one of my issues with this case so far,
there's no motive.
And again, for those of you not familiar with the case that we're talking about here, we're talking about the Natalie Cochran case that's going on right now in Beckley, West Virginia, my state. It's in my neck of the woods. This is a case that originates back to 2019, and this is a situation where this lady is being charged with unaliving her husband. The allegations are that she was running a Ponzi scheme on the back of his business. He was a businessman who apparently did things with running. I think there was some sort of technology. He was a technology guy, and he got government contracts, or at least this is what he believed was happening. And he was getting contracted work through the government, and then he was supposed to be fulfilling those contracts and doing whatever work it was. And his wife and himself saw an opportunity to get investors on the backs of these government contracts. They went to their family, their friends in the community of Beckley, West Virginia, and Charleston, West Virginia, and collected a good deal of money, a couple of
Half a
$1
billion.
million.
Half a billion.
And they apparently, if you're talking to the state, Michael had no idea that these contracts were not actually being gotten. And Natalie, who was a pharmacist who then retired for being a pharmacist to run this business for her husband, allegedly Michael, who's running the business in the first place, doesn't do any checking, isn't looking in the back end of anything. He's just letting her run this thing. No one's sure what he's doing, because if these contracts aren't being fulfilled, he's not technically doing any work. So that's another problem that the state has in this case, is the idea that Michael Cochran, had no idea that these contracts weren't real, and he's allegedly going out there doing what work? I mean, how does this work? He's the one that's supposed to be fulfilling them. So anyways, the idea here is that these contracts are not real, and she's collecting money, and she's basically running a Ponzi scheme. She's getting money from A and using it to pay back B, and this thing gets out of control. The government shuts down. They're spending money. They're not actually doing the work. It's really unclear exactly how she would have been doing this without Michael knowing, but that's what the state of West Virginia says was going on. They put up investigators from the Ponzi scheme who've come in and suggested there were text messages and things that suggest that Michael might not have known what was going on. So then we get to the really bizarre thing. She's relying on Michael and his business to run this Ponzi scheme. So for reasons really not known, that don't make any sense yet, because the state hasn't made it make sense, she decides, because allegedly Michael was getting suspicious, she decides she's going to off Michael. So now the whole business falls apart. It doesn't get her any more money. Now, and the investors are going to want to definitely pull their money out, which is exactly what happens. And on the back of his death, federal investigation comes, and this thing gets uncovered. She's doing 11 years for the Ponzi scheme now in federal prison. And suddenly they exhume the body of Michael, and they get this wild and crazy theory that she, as a pharmacist, decided to inject him with insulin, bottom him out, leave him in the house, call friends, leave him in the house all day to bottom out. And then he's taken to the hospital where he dies. Now, leading up to this, as we're going to see when we go through the testimony, he was having health issues. Now, Michael was also a bodybuilder. He was a really strong dude. He was in tough man competitions. He was in mutter man competition. He was basically an all around tough guy, all around big guy, and he was very built. And he bodybuilded. He used supplements. I think they said somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 to 40 supplements a day. He was also using anabolic steroids. And that testimony has come out through the testimony of friends, his children, both his daughter and his son testified. And it is inside of this that the defense right now is suggesting that something in his substance abuse, that there was also benzodiazepines, which I think is like something similar to Xanax and stuff like that. They were found in the system at the hospital. The suggestion is by the defense is that something in those supplements, he was abusing steroids, he was abusing supplements, something in that caused whatever condition he had that he died. And of course, the problem with that is the defense, which the state's relying on, the state has said, well, he had this drop in blood sugars. When he got to the hospital, he went from his wife said his blood sugars were at 145 at 3 p.m, and he's at 21 at like 7 o'clock when he's unconscious and brought into the hospital. Never wakes up again, lasts for about 5 more days, but ultimately passes away. He's 30, I believe he was 38 years old. So he's a young man. Like I said, in great physical condition. So this was a mystery. And the state of West Virginia has decided that this mystery was solved by her unaliving him to cover up a Ponzi scheme. It's absolutely, in my opinion, ridiculous. This case is riddled with reasonable doubt, but it doesn't mean that a jury, as trier of fact and decider of fact, can't go back to that room and be so angry at her that they say,
They're ripping off
you
the
know what,
community.
right now with the defense, how the big thing that the state's relying on is how did his insulin drop? So that is a key factor in this case. And Jody Bolt over at the defense risk thinks she has uncovered it. So with that said, let's get into what her theory is. And I have it broken down here medically of what it is. And then we're going to look in the testimony and see how many witnesses that have testified out of the 19 that have testified have offered up evidence that this is true. So with that said, give me a moment here. Let me pull this up here and we're getting into this. So how can steroids, so her theory on this is that Michael Cochran was suffering from Addison's disease. So what is Addison's disease?
Well, secondary.
We're going to talk about it here and talk about how does steroid use lead to Addison's disease. So steroid use, particularly long-term use of corticosteroids like prednisone, can contribute to a condition known as secondary Addison's disease. Addison's disease occurs when the adrenal glands do not produce enough of certain hormones such as cortisol and aldosterone. In the case of secondary Addison's disease, the issue typically arises from the suppression of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This suppression can be a result of prolonged steroid use, which he did have and has been something that's been testified to throughout this case, where the body becomes reliant on the external source of corticosteroids and the adrenal glands stop producing their own cortisol. If the steroids are abruptly stopped, the adrenal glands may not resume normal cortisol production right away, leading to symptoms of Addison's disease, which can include fatigue, weakness, weight loss, and low blood pressure. However, Addison's disease itself is generally caused by other factors such as autoimmune disorders, infections, damage to adrenal glands, rather than directly by steroid use. The steroid use only contributes to secondary Addison's in cases where the body's own cortisol production is affected. So Jody's theory is that his use of steroids contributed to him developing secondary Addison's disease. Now, is it deadly? Yes, Addison's disease can be dangerous and potentially life-threatening. It is not if not properly managed. The adrenal glands are responsible for producing important hormones like cortisol and aldosterone, which help the body manage stress, regulate blood pressure, and maintain electrolyte balance. When these hormones are deficient due to secondary Addison's disease, it can lead to serious complications, especially during times of stress like illness, injury, or surgery. Remember, he had back surgery, which is when he would have stopped using these steroids, which would have given the time for this to develop. He also had exposure to mold, which would have also caused for some of this to develop. So potential life-threatening complications include Addisonian crisis or adrenal crisis. This is a medical emergency that can occur when cortisol levels drop sharply, and symptoms can include severe weakness, confusion, nausea, vomiting, low blood pressure, loss of consciousness if untreated. An Addisonian crisis can lead to shock and death. And that's what Jody believes happened here. Electrolyte imbalances, a lack of aldosterone can lead to dangerous imbalances in potassium and sodium levels that may result in dehydration, low blood pressure, and even heart problems. And it can also result in hyperglycemia. Cortisol helps regulate blood sugar levels. So deficiency can lead to dangerously low blood sugars, which can cause weakness, confusion, seizures, and even coma, which is exactly what he was suffering from: seizures, confusion, weakness, not knowing where he's at. Because of these risks, for individuals with secondary Addison disease to work closely with a healthcare provider to manage their conditions, including the use of synthetic corticosteroids to replace hormones in their adrenal glands that their adrenal glands are no longer producing. Does secondary Addison's disease cause low blood sugar? Yes. It can cause low blood sugar. We just talked about that. The adrenal glands, which are affected, produce cortisol, a hormone that plays a role in regulating blood sugar levels. Cortisol helps maintain stable blood sugar by promoting glucose production and preventing excessive insulin secretion. In secondary Addison's disease, the lack of cortisol production can disrupt this balance, making it more difficult for the body to maintain normal blood sugar levels, especially during periods of stress or fasting. This can lead to hypoglycemia, which may cause symptoms such as weakness, sweating, shakiness, confusion or difficulty concentrating, irritability or mood changes, rapid heart rate, dizziness, or lightheaded. All of these he was reporting.
Yep.
In severe cases, hypoglycemia can result in more serious symptoms like seizures, loss of consciousness, or even coma, which is exactly what happened to him.
Yep.
Managing secondary Addison's disease with appropriate hormone replacement therapy helps to stabilize blood sugar levels and prevent hypoglycemia. If you're experiencing symptoms of low blood sugar or have concerns about your condition, it's important to consult with a healthcare provider. So there you have it, guys. That's the base level of what we've got to consider here. And when you look at this, and we're going to talk about the testimony and what supports it and what doesn't. Now, I'm going to have to make this the part one. Hold on one second, buddy. Hold on one second. I'm live, yes. So hold on. I'm going to have to make this a part one because I've got to go. I'm being contacted right now, so I've got to make this a part one. But this is the introduction to this, and we're doing a part two, and part two is going to be breaking down the testimony in support of what you just read here. So this is the overall theory Jody Bolt has. We're going to be looking back at the testimony. I've got it broken down to see, does it support this? But if you're reading this, if you've been following this trial, then you will know that all of these things absolutely are present or were present in this case. So this again, it's pretty exciting here. So anyways, with that said, guys, be on the lookout. I'll be back live for second half of this. I'm sorry for cutting this short, but I'll be back live here in a little while with a second part. Talk to y'all soon.
Hang on.
So let me actually hold on. I'm going to get the next one up here. So is that other places? All right.
Okay,
All
sweetheart.
right, so here we go, guys.
I'll
So
drop
here
it
is the
down.
testimony. So we're going to go through the testimony and how it supports what we just talked about. So if you were following there, hopefully if you just joined because some of you left because of the fact that I thought I was going off air. If you go back a little bit, you're going to see the theory that we have here that our good friend Jody Bolt over to the Fence Rest has raised on how Michael Cochran may have died. And we're looking now back through the testimony on what testimony supported that Michael Cochran could have been suffering from or even possibly could have passed away from Addison's disease. So
There you go, sweetheart. It's in the chat.
let's jump in here.
I've just double checked Court TV.
All right, so the first one we're going to look at is his son's testimony because he was very close with his father. So based on this testimony, the following were items supported it. His fatigue and weakness. Michael was described as becoming less active, losing interest in activities he previously enjoyed, such as doing sports and engaging in physical activities like hunting and shooting. His fatigue and lack of energy could be a sign of an adrenal insufficiency, which is a common symptom of Addison's disease.
Now
there we have one piece of support. Increased irritability and aggression. This is coming from
what he's reading now is actually extracted from the testimony within this trial. So this is evidence of people's testimonies to support this.
From his son. He mentioned that he became more aggressive. He snapped at people more frequently. This could reflect an imbalance in hormones, as Addison's disease can sometimes cause mood swings, irritability, and depression. So we have another piece of support here. Memory issues and brain fog. Michael was noted, his son said that he was forgetting things that he planned. He seemed to experience brain fog. He had difficulty concentrating, remembering things. This could be a sign that he had, due to the low cortisol levels that Addison's disease will create, that it was affecting his brain function. Physical discomfort. He didn't verbally complain about being in physical pain. The witness did mention that he appeared perfectly okay, but he became less happy over time. So the lack of cortisol that's being produced can cause muscle weakness, low blood sugar, which is what ultimately we believe, or the state says he died from or causes problems, and other discomfort, which may manifest in his depression and lack of interest in activities. His loss of appetite and weight loss, while not explicitly stated, those are symptoms that, again, that could be present in hypotension. So that would be, now that was mentioned in November, okay, where he had the blood, where he had issues with his blood pressure that led to him being in the hospital, and the son touched on that. So the son definitely brings up, again, several things that align with his father suffering from Addison's disease. He also said, his son also brought into the picture that he used steroids, that he saw his father injecting himself with steroids, that he used steroids that he got from Mexico. So the steroid abuse, again, would have led.
Oops. My bad. Yeah. Funnily enough, there's no trial on today. The three defense experts all suddenly had scheduling issues today, so it's postponed until Monday. Wonder why. Yeah.
Led to, and this is something that when we see Dr. Krieger testifies, and we're seeing there,
Well,
that she.
I woke up to this. I didn't even know he was doing it. So I'm glad that I didn't stop the stream, and you can see it play out in real time. So hopefully we'll see what Monday brings.
She actually excludes the possibility of steroids. She says she didn't see evidence of steroid use, but we know, as the defense is put on now, everyone close to Michael Cochran knows he used steroids. And I actually applied an analysis to say, if you take her testimony and apply what she said with steroid use, would it have been consistent? Would it say that his death was consistent with him having suffered from Addison's disease? And you're going to see the results of that here, that yes, it would have been. So
what Steve's reading now is he did a search through the entire testimony of the trial to pick up any of the symptoms and side effects and, everything to do with the steroid abuse and symptoms for Addison's disease. And this is what he's reading out. So witness testimony to support the theory.
The next testimony we're going to look at is Penny Lowry. Now, Penny Lowry was Natalie's sister. She says that Michael would say he couldn't think clear. He wouldn't remember things. He seemed to be foggy all the time. So if you go back and watch her testimony from today, you'll see that in there at the timestamp 657 into her testimony. This could suggest cognitive issues, which can sometimes be related to Addison's disease. And that suggests that he was having confusion and difficulty concentrating. Also said that Michael said he felt dizzy often. He had trouble thinking clearly, which again is symptoms of an adrenal gland disorder. She observed that he had episodes of throwing up, which she thought might be seizure activity. So vomiting, dizziness, seizure activity, sudden worsening of symptoms, all could be indicative of Addison's disease. Penny states that Michael seemed different, more angry, had memory problems. And again, this is at 8:16, 8:49 in her testimony. These cognitive and emotional disturbances are symptoms that could be seen in someone with untreated Addison's disease. She observed that Michael's health was worsening over time. She recalls his condition seemed to get worse than improve, particularly after an episode in November 2018 when he was hospitalized. She mentions the experiencing of dizziness, feeling foggy thinking, even after he's hospitalized and then discharged. And then he was in an ongoing health decline, which led to chronic fatigue, weakness, and lack of clarity in thinking. All of these are possible signs he was suffering from Addison's disease. Okay. And with his exposure to mold, with his back surgery, the back surgery specifically would have stopped him from using steroids, allowing the room for this to possibly develop. And then on top of that, the steroid use could mask then the worsening of this, but then with his having been exposed to mold would have introduced the potential stress to a system that would have caused the worsening of these symptoms, which could have then and then of course you add in the stress of running a Ponzi scheme. And now we're looking at the Ponzi scheme. Yes, it caused Michael's death, but it didn't cause his death because his wife wanted to kill him. It caused his death because the stress he was under caused his Addison's disease to worsen, caused those symptoms to worsen, and then caused him to go into an adrenal crisis, to which he collapses in his kitchen, to which he then falls. And on top of that, part of his bodybuilding regimen, as you're going to see the defense already alluded to in cross-examinations, and probably will allude to in his
Ponzi
testimonies. It's not uncommon for bodybuilders to use insulin for purposes of bodybuilding. And that is actually written into one of the medical manuals and studies that was brought to Dr. Urabi in his cross-examination. So here we have literally, I mean, when this goes to the jury, how can a jury come back and convict this woman of anything beyond a reasonable doubt? We don't know.
If you need to go back to the start of this stream and have a look at the testimonies that I've picked out.
And all the tests that could have been done weren't done. And then the body was buried. And then eventually it was exhumed. And then all we find out is we can never know. So that's the textbook definition of reasonable doubt. And that's all of the state's experts. We haven't even talked about those offenses experts that will testify next week. So Penny describes a moment where Michael collapsed and was taken to the hospital, noting he was severely sick and later appeared to be even angrier than usual.
I went back to try and find where it was. I was talking to Steve on the on the stream, and all I can see is myself eating cherries, and I'm still doing it. It's not like I do it all day, but they're nice and quiet. You can't hear me chewing in the microphone. And they're good for you.
Collapse, especially if accompanied by symptoms, could indicate an Addisonian crisis, which requires immediate treatment with cortisol. So, all of these things are, again, in her testimony, lots of evidence there. Now, his daughter testifies. She says there were symptoms of fatigue and irritability, described him as being very agitated, suffering from headaches, dizziness. He appeared forgetful and acting crazy in 2019, showing signs of mental fatigue and forgetfulness, along with...
Steve actually got to speak to the defense attorney, the one I called... the one who got the dipshit award. Only because he was off sick yesterday. How's that, the universe? And yeah, I've just double checked court TV. No day 7. Nah. Ba-boom. Yeah, he did. He spoke to them. Yep. There was 3 experts for the defense that were on for today. And all 3 of them have scheduling issues. And it's been postponed till Monday.
Then we have physical symptoms. He wasn't eating as much as he used to. Loss of appetite. There it is. He continued to his health history. She says that the headaches, the dizziness. Testimony notes that he was treated for a brain tumor, which may have been misdiagnosed because it could have made him think he had a brain tumor, because I guess Addison's disease.
That's what I said to Teresa this morning. I said, "Oh my God, if they look at my stream, I've given him the dipshit award." Whoops. Well, he is. He should have picked this up. That's their job.
Can cause that type of a misdiagnosis, and that's what it was. You've got the steroid use.
Mhm.
He was taking steroids and other supplements, and his use of steroids was confirmed. It's notable because Addison's disease requires corticosteroid replacement therapy, often involving the use of oral steroids. Long-term steroid use can also lead to complications if suddenly stopped or poorly managed.
Want to hear something really funny? True crime is a tough gig. What does a girl have to do to get over 1,000 subs? Solve a murder case? Really? I mean, what the fuck? Tough audience.
And here's the problem. He wasn't managing it. So again, remember, when you're using something like steroids or any type of pharmaceutical, your body develops a tolerance. So the other issue, and maybe the defense will touch on this next week, is the tolerance factor. And if you are not managing your steroids and increasing your dosages as needed,
Yep.
then you can develop things like secondary Addison's disease that would then cause you to have the symptoms start to get out of control. And since he's not dosing himself properly, it's the same as not taking them
Because
at
he
all.
doesn't know
It's the
the
same as
damage he's doing.
complicating them. So in my opinion, again, this is a fantastic theory. So hats off to Jody over at
He
the
had to
Defense
consult
Rest.
his wife, who's
I'm
a
sure
nurse
she'll
as
be
well.
talking more about this. So definitely head over. There's a link up there attached in the chat. Head over to her channel, get subscribed, and I'm sure she will be talking about this. The large amounts of steroids he took
Oh,
along
wonder
with his
how
use of
many
anabolic
subscribers I've got.
steroids for muscle building may have exacerbated any underlying adrenal insufficiency or contributed to symptoms. Medical
700.
concerns and hospital visits. He
One
went to the
more.
hospital multiple times with headaches, dizziness, mental confusion,
One more than
showing his
yesterday.
health was deteriorating. In November of 18, they considered a possibility of a brain tumor due to his confusions and dizziness, but it could have been a result of an Addison's crisis, which he wasn't telling anyone he was doing these things. You know, that's the problem. He didn't like hospitals. He wasn't a compliant patient.
Mhm.
So, and again, remember, your hospital visit, as I always tell my wife and my
Trust your real
kids,
life
is as
shit.
good as what you're willing to talk to your doctor about. If you're not willing to talk to your
Yep.
doctor about stuff, it's not going to be as good. Family concerns. They witnessed that in this case that his symptoms had worsened. So I mean, look, like I said, this is screaming off the page here. Michael Treadway, his friend, he testifies that Michael was agitated, confused. He testifies about a Panera Bread incident where Michael didn't even know that he was wearing a hat, even though he was wearing a hat. He didn't think he was wearing a hat. He testifies to that he noticed physical symptoms and decline in his health. He described him as always being very focused and athletic. However, around 2018, that changed. He began acting in ways that were out of character for him. Again, this is all in line with, remember, he had mold exposure. He had his back surgery because he injured his back. These are things that trigger this. And then on top of that, he's not managing. His steroids are not being managed.
Mhm.
And this is what can develop out of it. He talks about the hospitalization. He talks about headaches. And again, this
I have I've emailed him. I have tagged him in this. I have tagged him on Twitter. He's doing day 5 at the moment. So he's live at the moment doing day 5. So I might jump into his chat shortly. And just apologise for cancelling day 7. But I have done a redirect after this to his stream, so you're welcome to go over there and and make some noise. I need a wee.
comes to the conclusion that what was happening in February of 2019 was a potential adrenal crisis. Trooper Bledsoe talks about this, that in his investigation.
This is about the time I wake up and start getting into Steve's chat.
He found symptoms that supported
Right,
this. This is the lead investigator. He says that there was health history. The health history that he discusses are all symptoms that could be in a line with Addison's disease. For instance, the unexplained weight loss, fatigue, muscle weakness, dizziness. These are all things confirmed by this investigator. Inconsistent diagnosis or lack of medical attention because he wasn't willing to go to the doctors. He wasn't willing to have a doctor manage his treatment plan. Let's see here. The autopsy says that it referenced findings that were consistent, such as the presence of high potassium levels and low blood pressure, both of which are commonly seen in undiagnosed or unrelated Addison's disease. Then we have Trooper John Hamilton. This was the gentleman that was a friend of his. He came to his house. I actually took him to the hospital. He talks about the seizure and the health episodes, and that Michael was flailing around. This was in November 2018. Talks about how Mike didn't want to go to the hospital, which means, again, whatever's happening here is going untreated, unmanaged. So he is absolutely just ripe for this to develop. Let's see here. Trooper Hamilton goes on to discuss the steroid use in bodybuilding. He confirms that, yes, he was using steroids. And of course, Addison's disease can be managed or go undiagnosed for some time, especially individuals who might be using steroids to try to maintain their physical strength. The misuse of steroids or failing to adjust them properly during periods of stress, like a seizure or illness, could have contributed to the adrenal crisis. So his failure to have a management plan is exactly what could be happening here. General illness symptoms include fatigue, weakness, salt cravings. And all of this lines up with what was being described. And what happened that day, him suddenly collapsing. He went into crisis. And then one of the things that's going to happen is your blood sugars are going to drop, and it's going to be unmanaged. It's going to appear exactly as if this, like the one doctor said, yeah, you have two things. It could be an adrenal crisis, or it could be he was injected with insulin. Well, we don't have any evidence he was injected. We have no injection sites. It doesn't even make sense that this would happen. What makes sense is he was a steroid abuser, and he created this for himself, and he also happened to be running a Ponzi scheme. He also happened to be living one heck of a stressful life. So, anyways, we're running through this here. Jennifer Davis, a lot of this is just confirming the same things and the same things that everyone else has seen. He was taking steroids. He had flu-like illness. That they've been both sick with the flu. So that's the other thing too. If they were sick with the flu, if Natalie was sick with the flu, that was at least somewhat confirmed here by this testimony that she was sick, and her daughter said she was sick, and the kids said she was sick. And if they were having a virus run through them, that is exactly the circumstances that would have set in motion an adrenal crisis, because his body would be unable to deal with that. It would cause an immediate drop in his blood sugars. So we have the family friend, the physician's assistant. I didn't catch her name because it was silent during that time. They were having problems. But she, again, talks to he had that again, respiratory failure, low blood sugar. She was talking about there was possible insulin overdose because she was talking about, I guess, that there was presence of insulin, and they were questioning her about that. But she saw him that day. And the things she observed are all in line with a potential adrenal crisis. She didn't think of that. She did not suggest that that's what it was. Then we have Brenda Epperly, even in this hospice nurse who took care of him. She says that when the testimony does mention that he had a constellation of internal physical problems, including an enlarged heart, brain swelling with edema, seizures, and hypoglycemia. Addison's disease was not mentioned in the history provided to the nurse. But the heart condition, the brain swelling, and the hypoglycemia were noted, which could indicate multiple organ failure, which could be caused by Addison's disease. So all of those things, again, it doesn't mean it is. There's not been a link presented, but it could be a result of it. Says that the death certificate listed acute respiratory failure due to cerebral edema, meaning Michael Cochran's breathing stopped and fluid built up in his brain. What it doesn't specifically point to Addison's disease, One of the symptoms of Addison's disease is an inability to respond to stress, which can cause an adrenal crisis, which, if untreated, an adrenal crisis can lead to shock, hypertension, possibly death, which might result in respiratory failure and organ failure that could mimic some of the symptoms described in the testimony, specifically in what's happened here. She heard moaning, signs of discomfort, and all of this could be because he was in crisis and having problems. And then we go to Jason Bowen, again, another kind of redundant witness with confirming all of the things that happened. He talks about what he witnessed, the collapse, the not being fully awake, going into what looked like seizures. Look, you could see so many witnesses have corroborated the symptoms matching Addison's disease. What's going on, defense rest? Defense rest is in the house. So, well, not only that, Hannah B, not just pointed out in closing, they've got to make sure their experts talk about this. Dr. Krieger. Now, what does she testify to? She discusses how Michael's blood glucose levels were severely low. A primary cause could be insulin overdose. Also, it could be adrenal insufficiency. So she actually says adrenal insufficiency could have been a cause, right? And when you take into account that the factors to get to an adrenal insufficiency were present, that is absolutely 100% reasonable doubt. And I don't see how this jury could come to any verdict other than not guilty at this point. Dr. Krieger, if this is argued correctly, Dr. Krieger outlines that insufficiency of the adrenal gland, which can be associated with Addison's disease, could lead to low blood sugar. However, she also stated that there was no evidence to suggest that Michael Cochran had issues with his adrenal gland, except she's not even taking into account the steroid use at all.
His wife is a nurse, and I'd sent him, when I rang, he was at the doctor's with Carson, his little baby, and couldn't talk to me. So I messaged him and sent him a link of the information of this. And I said to her, don't ignore this. It is urgent. Ring me back, which he did. And then you saw, obviously, me talking on the phone to him here, but I still had to convince him. And then when he got off the phone, he spoke to his wife, and she went, yes, yes. So then he started doing a deep dive, and he rang the attorneys.
And she, of course, is relying on
this testimony, and I can't find it. Hang
on. 7-week-old body where she wasn't able to make any conclusions one way or another. She acknowledges that it's a cause of hypoglycemia, and the fact that it was not definitively ruled out leaves open the possibility it could be. So the fact that it's a possibility, even by this doctor's testimony, I think is enough. Yes, I did, defense rest. I'm going to talk to you about that offline. But yes, I did. Yes, I did. There was a noted low potassium level in Michael's blood, which can sometimes be seen in patients with adrenal insufficiency, including Addison's disease. This condition can cause an imbalance in electrolytes, which is often associated with low potassium levels. So that, again, right there, that is one of the things that it says we would be looking for, and there it is. Cortisol and white blood cell count explains how excess cortisol, which is produced by adrenal glands, can affect white blood cell counts. In patients with conditions like Addison's disease, the body may attempt to compensate by elevating cortisol levels, which in turn could explain elevated white cell count levels. There we go.
I found it. I'll upload it.
Possibility of multiple insulin doses. Dr. Krieger also suggested the possibility of multiple insulin injections, which is a possibility, but you can't say beyond a reasonable doubt that that's what happened. Now, what I did is I asked the software, I said, assume that he's...
Look, as I said to Steve, she may be a horrible person. And yes, she's done the wrong thing and ripped off so many people. But she's been tried for that, and she's serving a time. This is completely different, completely. And it seems to the opinion that I was getting from Steve this morning was that it's almost a community cry to have this woman charged because of, it was $500 million that she defrauded the community from. And apparently there is a huge, there's a lot of pressure from the community to get a conviction here, even though she's doing her time for the fraud. But my opinion is, if you're innocent, you're innocent. Yeah, just because she's an asshole doesn't mean that she deserves to be convicted of a murder that she didn't do. That's my opinion, anyway.
He's a daily steroid user. This is what it comes.
I just said it, Hef. This true crime, this true crime genre is a tough audience. What does a girl have to do to get over 1,000 subs? So solve a murder. It just didn't make sense. I couldn't work out what the motive was. It didn't fit. Nothing. Yeah. And I sat here and I'm like, the jigsaw just kept coming. What? Take off my top. You don't want to see that. There ain't no therapy that'll fix that. That's for sure. You'll get. Oh, well, yeah, okay. Yeah, to get it. So I get you now. Sorry. Not working at Hooters. Used to work when I was younger.
Comes back with when it analyzes your testimony. Dr. Krieger, cortisol imbalance and elevated blood. So Dr. Krieger mentioned when blood sugar levels drop significantly, hormones like cortisol rise to compensate, which can cause white blood cell counts to increase. So there's evidence right there that is exactly what was happening in this case, potentially. If Michael Cochran had Addison's disease, his adrenal glands would not produce enough cortisol, which could lead to an inability to properly regulate his blood sugar during times of stress, such as taking insulin or during illness. They had the flu, which means his body goes into adrenal shock. He collapses on the floor of the kitchen, and this whole thing develops. And it's got nothing to do with killing him to stop a Ponzi scheme, which made no sense. The Ponzi scheme he most assuredly had to be aware of. Cortisol production from the adrenal gland is critical for maintaining normal blood sugar levels. If the adrenal gland fails, as in Addison's disease, the body cannot mount a normal response. Steroid use and the impact on the adrenal gland. Daily steroid use can suppress the natural function of the adrenal gland. If Michael had been using steroids for an extended period of time, his adrenal glands may have become atrophied or impaired, meaning they would not have been able to produce sufficient cortisol during a crisis, such as an insulin overdose or a significant infection. So obviously it's a possibility it could have been insulin overdose, but it also could have been an infection, which we know is possible, and they can't rule that out. Dr. Krieger disclosed adrenal insufficiency is a rare cause of hypoglycemia. While she stated there was no evidence of adrenal issues in Michael Cochran, it's important to note that daily steroid use could have contributed to subclinical adrenal insufficiency.
Can you imagine Steve's face while this is printing out? He's like, got an exclusive.
Or suppressed his body's ability to respond to stress. This may not have been obvious from standard tests. Hypoglycemia and lack of response to insulin. The testimony mentioned there was no liver issues, no history of alcohol use, no malignancy.
There was liver function tests that were abnormal.
And no evidence of autoimmunity.
And his white blood cells were elevated. And what else did he say?
Contributing to low blood sugar in Michael's case. However, Dr. Krieger points out that adrenal insufficiency, as seen in Addison's disease, could have contributed to the hypoglycemia. There we go. It's right here in her testimony.
And this second ME, the one that actually changed the manner of death, he's asked by the defense attorney what what did you eliminate to get to this conclusion that the only possible explanation was an insulin injection? And he mentions adrenal insufficiency. I've got it here. I'm just uploading it. I knew I'd forgotten one.
Hope the defense is going to address this with their experts, and I hope that they really did not flesh this out in their cross, which is why it's concerning that maybe they're not focused on this, but they should be. If Michael's adrenal glands were not functioning properly due to steroid use or Addison's disease, his body would have struggled to raise blood glucose during hypoglycemic episodes. This could explain why his blood sugar dropped to critically low levels and the lack of response to conventional treatments. That's why it wouldn't come up. It was not because of multiple injections.
Yep.
It was because he went into an adrenal crisis, his blood sugars dropped, and he couldn't come up because of that. General symptoms of Addison's disease and hypoglycemia. While there is no direct evidence from the records to suggest Michael and was masking the disease's symptoms, but under stressful conditions like an insulin overdose or an infection, his adrenal insufficiency became fatal. Elevated white blood cells, an infection. Well, Jamie, except she didn't leave him to die. So are we charging all the other people that came through that house? Okay, I mean, look at all the witnesses that we just went through that were at that house that day. We had a physician's assistant who didn't put him in the car. It wasn't until Hamilton came to the house and put him in the car. The issue is Michael didn't like going to hospitals. And when you're in a situation where you're trying to figure out, is this just an illness? Michael's going to be so mad. After he left the hospital last time in November, he was very upset with her. Okay. She did text a photo to the sister, and the sister, it wasn't done in a way of like, look, I want him to die. It was like, she was worried about him. What should she do? Some people, especially, were taking the fact that Michael, as testimony of his son, he was a very controlling individual. So her ability to just make the decisions wasn't there. It took Hamilton's coming in, taking control of the situation, and putting him in the car to do it. She was afraid. It makes no sense that she would just leave him in this house, call all these people over to see him. That's the problem. Now, had she just like never called anyone and didn't invite anyone over, then it might look differently. But you don't put him on display for the town to have state troopers come in, physician's assistants come in. I mean, she had 2 different state troopers come into the house and see him that day. Why in the world would you do that if you're trying to kill him? You would have just said, hey, I'm just going to leave, we're sick, we're not coming out. And then all of a sudden, she presents him to the emergency room, or she calls 911, or she calls one of those people and says, oh my God, I think he died, right? Then that would have looked suspicious. But she's bringing people over, showing that she's having confusion over what to do. And a lot of that, as explained by the other people, was he got so mad when he did not want to go to the hospital. The son said that, the daughter said that, the friend said that, and she just was, again, it's funny when people get into situations, especially people like, she's a pharmacist, and many might say, well, she should know, she's in the medical field. She should have been, well, those are sometimes the worst people to make decisions about their loved ones. The testimony surrounding Michael Cochran's death, so this is Dr. Kubitschek.
That's the first.
He says, in Dr. Kubitschek's autopsy findings, he says that he saw, now this was 7 months after, he says it's undetermined, right? He was the one that determined it was undetermined because of the fact that it had been decomposition had already begun. But they found an enlarged heart, which could be a potential sign of Addison's disease. He reviewed the records noting the hypoglycemia, the seizures, the cerebral edema. The toxicology report showed no alcohol, no drugs, no heavy metals. Although some of that could have, of course, dissipated due to the fact that it was 7 months after the fact. The cause of death was undetermined. So again, when you have an undetermined cause of death, that in itself is a reasonable doubt, and the state has to overcome that, and I don't think they have. And then we go down to Dr. Uribe, or Uribai, or however you want to say his name.
Who the hell is
He says in his testimony, he says hypoglycemia and refractory hyperglycemia. Dr. Uribe noted that Michael Cochran had significant hypoglycemia with a glucose level of 21, which is extremely low. He noted that it did not respond to the typical treatments, despite the administration of sugar, which is one of the keys that the state is relying on as saying he was administered multiple injections of insulin. However, a hallmark of Addison's disease is adrenal insufficiency, which could also be responsible for the persistent hypoglycemia. Well, Jamie, no one has a legal. You have a legal responsibility over your child, but it was not readily apparent in that situation that 911 was necessary. Now, if he had been gunshot on the floor and she walked away, you might be able to make that argument. This is a subjective situation. Again, she called a bunch of people over. So you can't even run that on her. She called police over. She called medical professionals over. But you, in theory, it's a very murky situation. You do not have a responsibility necessarily to call for medical help unless you were doing something to cause that problem. You can walk on down the street and walk on by the person you see suffering. But it depends on what your knowledge is of the situation. But if you know you did something to them and you don't call them, then you could find yourself in some trouble. And then if it's your child, if you have a duty to care for your child, you do. They're under the age of 18 or under your care. They're not recognized as being in a position to care for themselves. So you're overseeing their care. So when it comes to children, yes, you do have a duty of care. When it comes to your husband or an older person, it gets to be a murkier line. In the fact that he said he didn't want to go, she doesn't get to override that. If she knows he doesn't like hospitals, she doesn't get to override that. And no one can charge her with the crime because she respects his decision and he dies. Right? So it's a much murkier situation when you get into an adult. So he says that during the autopsy, Uribe ruled out other causes of hypoglycemia, such as pancreatic tumors, insulinoma, and other known metabolic conditions. However, Addison's disease, which could be caused by an adrenal insufficiency leading to hypoglycemia, was not tested for. So he did not rule that out. So that is significant. This is why this needs to be. Oh no, you're fine, Jamie. This is a type of situation.
He did rule it out. I'm trying to upload the testimony and it won't fucking do it. Excuse me, the shits. What's the time on this video? Leave it with me. I'm still working it out.
It is meant to interrupt. So any questions you guys have, interrupt away. That's what Justice Watch Live's about. We're live, we're talking, we're interrupting, and we're discussing. So anything you have, questions you have, interrupt. We can go down rabbit holes. That's what it's all for. Discussion of adrenal insufficiency and other conditions. Dr. Uribe discussed adrenal insufficiency as a potential cause of Michael's hypoglycemia. While Addison's disease wasn't specifically diagnosed, he suggested that the adrenal insufficiency could contribute to the low blood glucose levels, and the lack of definitive tests postmortem made it difficult to rule out entirely. Boom! If the defense raises this and can bring in experts, this is reasonable doubt baked in to the state's own experts. It can't be ruled out. This is absolutely massive. Okay. Lack of injection sites. There was no signs of insulin injections on Michael's body, or C-peptides detected in postmortem, which would typically indicate insulin use. So there's not even signs that he used it, which they're trying to say he was injected multiple times. Dr. Uribe, however, pointed out that since the body had decomposed, and by the time it was difficult. So the state doesn't get to live like this, though. You don't get to say that,
right,
hey,
I might have found it. All right, let me see if this is the the bit. Share this instead. Unmute.
Catalog that there were any injection
You wouldn't
sites
see an
or
insulin injection site
signs
between them.
of injection in Michael Cochran's body. Isn't that
It is
correct?
the smallest
That's
fucking
correct.
syringe. But if they didn't suspect foul play, they wouldn't have been looking for that either. So they would have been looking for obvious stuff.
And you conducted an autopsy approximately 4 years after Michael's death
We've done this.
with still no.
Are you sure you didn't test the suit for insulin? Oh, fuck, I'm funny.
If you're
Yes.
talking about collapsing right after injection, that would not happen.
No.
Okay, thank you. No more questions.
All right, now, Miss Aker.
Yeah. I did message her on low carbs, high protein. They would use insulin to get him, shut up, Jody, into a ketotic state. Oh, and they said they're like they can't do anything.
So because of that, because there wasn't any tests or insulin present in Michael's body after death, you cannot say with absolute medical
Oh, my
certainty
God.
that insulin was involved in Michael Cochran's hypoglycemia or death, can you?
I can't do this.
First, I wouldn't use the term absolute. And there is no other viable explanation for
Look at that.
profound hypoglycemia in a non-diabetic, otherwise, relatively healthy male. There are
after
no
this, though.
natural conditions that bring someone's blood glucose to a lab-confirmed level
All
of
right,
21.
you've made that statement. Let me clarify
Yeah.
with some other
Well,
questions.
you've asked the fucking same question, you dickhead. Can you imagine them reviewing
What
this?
if you were told
Oops.
that Michael Cochran
Oh,
injected himself numerous times with insulin prior to his death? Would that change your conclusions? And let me clarify a
It's
little more.
it's possible, but why would a non-diabetic person inject themselves with insulin?
Well,
because they thought they were giving themselves something else. Mm. And I'm wearing my hat. I'm really plausible, aren't I? Yeah.
Potty
Well,
mouth.
we already know one vial was tampered with. She changed,
mouth
or
with,
someone had changed the
yeast infection
clomiphene to
and dipshit
prednisolone.
awards.
Blood thickens even more.
if they were a bodybuilder
Yeah,
and they were using insulin to assist them in their bodybuilding,
I
enhancing their
agree.
body.
there is no evidence. It could have been him. He could have injected himself with anything. You don't know what he did or what he was taking.
For
So-
various reasons. That could be a reason for self-injection of insulin, couldn't it?
To my knowledge, bodybuilders don't use insulin.
No, and he goes into the
Really?
stupid Mr. Olympia.
So you
Yes,
don't
really.
know that Mr. Olympia
Yeah.
died.
That's interesting. Very interesting, because Addison's disease. Look at that! Look at that!
It's really unknown why his blood glucose level goes down to 44. Would that be correct?
Correct.
Sorry. I'm just saying how credible am I? I've got my yeast infection hat on. I have a cock in the corner, which I'm covering up at the moment. Otherwise, I have a dipshit award flashing on the screen.
6:22 a.m.
Come on, just tell
For
me.
clarification,
This bit, I think it is.
what are the causes of
Yes,
hypoglycemia that you considered?
That you considered.
Could you repeat the question? Because I
He
can't tell if
said
you said
pancreatic.
hypo or hyperglycemia.
Pancreatic
Hypo,
cancer.
H-Y-P-O.
Yep.
Okay,
That means low.
hypoglycemia
What's
is
this?
caused by, can
130.
be caused by a number of different things, including pancreatic tumors, which can spontaneously
It
secrete
goes off on the
insulin.
ground.
These
Yeah,
are
yeah.
fairly rare. They were not
Excuse me,
identified.
Dr. Uribe, I don't want an extended explanation, just what the causes
Fuck off.
were.
Ready?
Causes include adrenal insufficiency,
Right there.
drug or medication effect.
Same thing. Same thing. Drug or medication effect. He says it. How could he test for it? With soup and bones. He can't. It wasn't tested. How do you rule it out if it wasn't tested? Sorry. But down. I win. You lose. And I've got a yeast infection, apparently.
We can't rule it out. That's not how it works. That's reasonable doubt. It's not here. It couldn't be tested for. You can't. The presumption of innocence is with the defendant. Therefore, we settle things like that by presuming the defendant innocent, and you haven't overcome that presumption thereby.
His enthusiasm didn't stop after the stream when he rang me either.
This is not guilty. This should be a very easy not guilty. Lack of a conclusive cause for hypoglycemia. You arrive also.
Do you actually remember how I met Steve? We don't need to go any more than that, I don't think. I met Steve because I had been, I'll go back up here. I had been, I'd watched the Ty Tucker trial, and something didn't sit right with me there either. And I decided that I was going to do a bit of a deep dive because I couldn't understand. It was the Cosmos Marine video that did it for me, where they show, it was that black and white one where they can show, the two tiny little figures walking across between the boats. And I noticed on the screen said camera 3. And I'm thinking, why camera 3? Camera 3 is up the back. Where's 1 and 2? Why would you choose camera 3 when obviously your vision is obscured by that massive canopy over the top and you get to see nothing? So I got on Google Maps and dropped a pin at the front of the treehouse on Laurel Avenue and did a 360 and counted how many cameras were actually in the area, because the treehouse was opposite the CVS pharmacy, massive CVS pharmacy, and there was at least 4 on that wall. There was one out of Keys Electric, I think, or right in front of the treehouse. There was 2 in front of the Cosmos Marine, and the only reason they didn't use, the owner of Cosmos Marine came up in the trial and testified, and he basically just gave them the access code to his security cameras and let them decide what they wanted to get. He didn't check. He didn't help them. He just said, yeah, knock yourself out, take what you want. And that's what they chose. And apparently Danielle Malone supposedly went to the other camera to request the other camera shots from the CCTV footage and put in the wrong date. And by the time they realised it was the wrong date, the evidence had been taped over. And so I put this presentation together, and Steve had been covering the case. So I contacted Steve to see if I had anything. And yeah, we did a live stream on it. That was before I think I'd only just started my channel, I think. Yeah, because that was early March. So there you go. That's how I met Steve. Oh dear. And he'd never done a collab or anything like that before. Neither had I, obviously, but yeah. I should go back and watch that. That was funny as. So there you go. How about we get on to RA and I put in his chat and see, because I have emailed him and share this one. Oh, yeah, it's the right one. There we go. Oh, no, you can't see the chat if I do that.
doing government contracts and
All
receiving
right. So he's on.
payment back from the government based on those contracts, which was not true.
Of course, you're in his head and you know what he was thinking. That's your testimony?
No, sir.
This is
I'm
day
not
4
saying that.
or 5.
Now, the federal government didn't take kindly to,
But a
Any
chatty
of this?
Joey.
and the federal government asked for the forfeiture of all of that property, didn't it?
Yes.
And for that matter, the federal government asked for the forfeiture of assets. Well, let's start with the
Ooh.
Because he's opening doors.
well, let's start with $523,343. And no, I'm sorry, it's the assets 523, 343, 361. What is it? $523 million?
That doesn't sound accurate. I'm
It's
not sure what
500.
you're referring to.
Well, I show you the forfeiture
Yes.
that the federal government filed.
Did you get my email
They didn't have half
Right,
$1
bro?
billion
Yes, ma'am.
worth of assets. I
today?
mean, it was a good Ponzi scheme, but not that good.
Would you please read this? The Cochrans listed their assets as.
Day 7 cancelled.
Oh, this is what they said they had.
Yes.
Trial.
I'm sorry. Listed as 522,091,571, and that was not true.
I didn't ask you whether it was true. It's in the
Sorry. My
federal
fault.
forfeiture proceedings.
It must be true. It's
And
in
it
the
was signed
federal
by the assistant U.S.
documents.
attorney. You think she made it up?
No,
somehow?
no.
Well, so they listed assets to the tune of $500 billion with a B, like boy, $1 billion.
Be like boy
Yes.
instead of be like M
Let's say,
million.
so that I'm coming home and my wife tells me, well, our assets are $500 million today. Shouldn't I be surprised?
All right. There you go.
Yes, I would be surprised. And
If
So
he brings it up.
Mr. Cochran looks at these assets that are listed. We have $500 million in assets. What the heck are we doing in West Virginia? We should be somewhere, I don't know, in Monte Carlo, some other place.
Hey,
$500 million.
Judge
sir.
smiles.
And
Judge
he
is
didn't know
laughing.
about all these assets?
I don't know if he listed that or
Everything
not.
was-
This document was filed in July of 2019 after Mr. Cochran's death.
West Virginia is beautiful.
Well, these assets, these $500 million, didn't. I mean, you know the saying, Rome wasn't built in one day. That $523 million did not grow in the bank or wherever it was in one day, right?
No, that information came from documentation that the defendant had tried to use as part of the federal indictment in which he was charged.
Well, as we agreed before, my gal was a pretty bad girl, right? My client here, she was a fraud, right?
I'm not here to judge anyone, sir.
Okay. Now,
But if you force me to, I'll answer.
I just want to ask you a couple of questions in regard to your testimony here today. You said that you were surprised, you found it odd when my client told you that her husband used to inject himself with insulin, right?
Yes,
Especially that it was in the back.
All right.
that's correct.
And you
It's,
found the word
got
back somewhat
700 odd people in his chat.
objectionable, right?
You can't see
But you found it
everyone.
odd.
Obviously, that's
Yes,
all right.
it didn't seem like something that I expected.
So I will send you on over there. Go and say hello. Oh. Yeah, let's stir some shit. Why not? Alrighty. If anything comes up in the meantime, I will be on. Keep your notifications on, and don't be good. Be good at it. Mwah. Hasta la vista.
Justice served in an honest fight. True crime tales till the verdict's right. Solving more than just trivial quests, where sentences rule at the defense rests. requests, where sentences rule and the defense rests.